Hi guys, this is a question that I get all the time. So you guys are always asking, what system do you use? What system do you use? I do not discriminate. I don't. If someone uses a different version to me or a system, that's up to you. That's your choice and that's what you prefer to use. That is what's going to work for you and that is great. I've never been on here and made people feel terrible about what their choice in system is. That's not my business because that's your life that you choose to live and this is mine. Now, I prefer to use Placidus. That's my preference when it comes to reading a chart. So if I'm reading a natal chart, I'm reading it in Placidus. And I prefer to use Placidus because I like to use degree theories for the houses, but I also like to look into interceptions. They play a huge role when you're looking at a Placidus chart, huge role in someone's chart. So that's my reasons as to why I prefer to use Placidus. If I look at transits, such as transits through the Placidus system, that's a great method as well. But I like to use a whole house system. Obviously you have to anyway when it comes to annual perfections. That makes a lot of sense. And obviously when it comes to progressions, I also use whole house system. When it comes to tracking my progressions in my Placidus chart, so I do a synastry of my progressions in my Placidus, I will use the Placidus. So obviously this is going to be confusing for some, like how can you do that? I'll give you an example. So I'm a Gemini rising and I have Taurus intercepted in my 12th house. So that means Aries rules my 12th house. My sun is at 27 degrees, literally in my 12th house in Placidus. I strongly identify as a 12th house sun. However, I can and I still do identify with my sun being in the 11th house a little bit, but I'll explain what I mean by that. So in Placidus, I'm a 12th house sun. The sun being there absolutely describes my dad, like to a T. He's a Pisces, he's a proper Pisces, but he describes my dad to a T. 12 houses is associated with Pisces, so it just makes sense. Now, in reference to my sun being in the 11th house, I don't identify with the description of dad being linked to the 11th house. And even in reference to Saturn, same thing with Saturn. I don't relate to my Saturn squaring my sun, which is in relation to dad as well. I don't relate to that. And that's because that's just me, you know? Doesn't mean that it has to be right or wrong. That's just my experience. However, when it comes to being part of a collective, I 100% identify with being part of the collective community, which is the 11th house. My sun sits there. But then again, also my Venus is in Pisces and my Venus is in my 11th house, right? But it's in the 12th house in whole house system. I can identify with whole house system and with Placidus system. I just prefer to use Placidus because I prefer the house system choices. However, I don't discriminate, okay? I don't discriminate, people. So my message to you guys is to use what works for you and literally roll with it, okay? Roll with it. But I'm not going to be here telling you you have to use this or you got to use that. It's about you guys exploring astrology and finding what works for you. I've read for people who use different versions of astrology and they were surprised at how accurate I interpreted their solar return, you know, when it came to using Placidus system. And it all is just dependent on who's interpreting your chart, because I would 100% relate to an astrologer who's reading a Vedic chart for me, my Vedic chart, or I would relate if someone's reading a sidereal chart for me. I'm going to relate. It depends on who's interpreting the chart. Be open-minded, guys. Let's just stop all of the arguments and people coming at me about what system that I choose to use, please.